I was elbow-deep in a seized boat engine when the voice came from the dock behind me. "Are you the one who fixed the Henderson's lobster boat?" I did not look up right away. The impeller housing had been fighting me for 20 minutes, and I was not about to let it win, because somebody wandered onto my slip. "Depends on who's asking," I said. "Miriam Ashford." I looked up, then. She was standing at the edge of the dock, in a charcoal wool coat, the kind that costs more than most people's rent. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she had the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime in rooms where posture mattered. The harbor wind off Georgian Bay was cold enough to bite, and she did not flinch. The name Ashford meant something in Owen Sound. Not in a loud way. In the quiet way that old money works. You know it without anyone having to explain it. The Ashford family had built half the waterfront properties on the bay in the 1940s. Hotels, a marina, a heritage inn on the escarpment, a summer lodge north of town that had hosted politicians and artists, and people whose names ended up in newspapers. When the locals talked about them, they said, "The Ashfords," the same way you say the name of a mountain, like it was always going to be there. I climbed down from the engine housing and wiped my hands on a rag. My coveralls were greasy from the knees up. I had motor oil on my left cheek that I would not discover until later. "What can I do for you?" She did not look at the engine or the boat or the water. She looked at me. "I need someone who knows how to repair things without making them unrecognizable. That's one way to put it." I tossed the rag over a bracket. "What kind of thing?" "A lodge. I'm a marine mechanic, Ms. Ashford, not a contractor." "You apprenticed under your uncle for 4 years. Framing, joinery, stone foundation work. You hold a red seal in boat repair and a journeyman's cert in heritage carpentry." She said it the way someone reads a file. Flat, without apology. I did my research. I stared at her. "Then you already know my answer." "I haven't asked you anything yet." I crossed my arms. "You're about to ask me to take on a job that's either too complicated, too personal, or too urgent for anyone else to say yes to." Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. More like she had decided to stop pretending. "All 3, probably," she said. The wind pushed a gull off the dock railing. We both watched it go. "I'm listening," I said, though I had not decided to be. Her name was Miriam Ashford, and she was the eldest of 3 children, born to Gerald Ashford, who had died the previous April. Gerald had run Ashford Escarpment Properties for 31 years with a grip that loosened for no one, including his family. He had left behind a will with a clause in it that his lawyers were apparently still arguing about, and a brother named Russell, who had been waiting his whole life for a moment like this one. The clause, as Miriam explained it, standing on my dock in a coat, worth more than my truck, said that the Ashford Lodge, the original property, north of town, the one the whole family had come from, could only be transferred under Russell's temporary trustee authority if the main building was deemed non-operational, closed for business. No active contracts, no documented restoration work, no evidence of ongoing use. Russell had been pushing to sell the lodge to a development group out of Toronto for 8 months. The group wanted to demolish it and build a resort condo project. Fast, profitable, nothing left. But if someone was actively restoring the lodge under a signed contract, it stayed operational by definition. And operational meant Miriam kept her board seat. And Miriam's board seat meant Russell did not have the votes to approve the sales. "So you need a contractor," I said. "I need one by Monday." It was Friday afternoon. "The trustee review is Tuesday morning. Russell has already filed the paperwork claiming the property is dormant. And if it isn't dormant, then his filing is false. The board reconvenes. He loses the motion." I looked out at the water. A freighter was moving slow across the bay, heading south toward Collingwood. I had grown up watching those ships from this dock. My uncle had taught me the names of every one. "What does this have to do with me specifically?" Miriam's hands tightened around the strap of her bag. 6 weeks ago, Russell approached your cousin's development company about subcontracting work on the condo site. Your cousin said no, but he passed the offer along to you. You said no twice. I had. Both times I said it without much thought. The numbers were fine, but the project felt wrong in the way some projects do before you know why. That was Russell. Yes. I stepped a little closer. She did not step back. You looked me up. My work history, my certifications, my family. You know what my cousin does for a living. I had to be thorough. You had to make sure I wasn't someone Russell could buy. She held my gaze. Yes. I looked past her at the lodge road, invisible from the dock, but something I knew was there. I had driven past Ashford Lodge 100 times growing up. Stone foundation from the 30s. Log and timber frame. Main hall. A wraparound porch that faced the escarpment and caught the morning light in a way that made you understand why someone had built there in the first place. Last time I had seen it up close, 2 summers ago, the porch was sagging on the east end and there was a tarp over part of the roof. Good bones. Bad luck. I knew that combination well. What do you get out of this? I asked. Time, she said, and the lodge stays standing. And me? What do I get? A fair contract, full payment for the scope of work, legal protection before, during, and after. She opened her bag and pulled out an envelope. My solicitor drew up something clean. Independent review included. I did not take the envelope right away. You came here with paperwork. I came prepared. You came assuming I would say yes. She looked me in the eye. I came hoping you would say yes after I told you the truth. I looked at the envelope, then at the lodge road again. I've got 2 conditions. She waited. First, I walk the property before I sign anything. I don't take work I can't finish, and I don't sign my name to a building I haven't seen from the inside. Done. Second, you tell me everything Russell has done, not the version your solicitor approved. All of it. Her jaw shifted once. The wind came off the water harder for a moment, and she held her coat closed with one hand. He has been recording maintenance calls to the lodge, logging them as proof of abandonment. He fired the caretaker in January without notifying the board. He told the condo developer the sale was essentially complete. She paused. He told them in November, before my father was buried. The dock was quiet except for the water and the lines moving against the cleats. All right, I said. She blinked. All right, I'll walk the property. If the bones are what I think they are, I'll sign Monday morning. From behind me, my coworker, Danny, who had been pretending to organize tackle for the last 10 minutes, said very quietly, "What just happened?" I picked up my tools. "We're going to look at a lodge." Ashford Lodge sat on 40 acres above the escarpment, at the end of a gravel road that the county had not graded since the previous autumn. I drove my truck. Miriam followed in a dark blue SUV that was significantly cleaner than anything on my property. When we pulled up to the main building, I sat in the cab for a moment just looking. It was bigger than I remembered. 3 stories of squared log and stone, with a covered porch that wrapped the south and east faces. The porch was worse than 2 summers ago. One section had buckled under ice load, and the boards had heaved. But the posts were still plumb. That mattered. Posts don't lie. They either hold or they fail, and these ones were holding. The roof tarp had been there too long. You could see the staining on the log beneath it. But when I walked the foundation with a probe, the stone was sound. The mortar was cracked in spots. Pointing needed work. But the footings had not moved. 100-year-old foundation that hadn't moved in 100 years of Georgian Bay winters was worth protecting. Inside, the main hall smelled like cold wood and dust and the particular silence of a building that had been asked to wait. The fieldstone fireplace at the north end was intact. The timber beams overhead had some checking. Natural. Nothing structural. The wide plank fir floors were dull and scuffed but unbroken. Someone had put plywood over a section near the east window where moisture had gotten under the finish. The plywood was wrong. The floor beneath it, I was willing to bet, was fine. Miriam walked beside me and did not say anything while I looked. She watched me run my hand along a window casing, crouch beside the baseboards, knock gently on a section of plaster to hear what came back. "This plaster's been touched up in the wrong decade," I said. "My father hired someone in the 90s. Whoever it was used modern compound over the original lime. You can feel the seam." I stood up. "It'll need to come off and be redone properly. That's not optional. I understand. The porch on the east side is a rebuild. The posts are fine but the decking and the joists underneath are gone." "How long? For the porch alone?" 3 weeks minimum, done right. The roof section under the tarp needs the damaged courses replaced before anything can be finished inside below it. The floors can be salvaged in most places. The windows are original and most of the glazing is intact, which is rare. I looked at a door casing near the hall entrance. White pine, hand-planed, a bead profile that nobody bothered to run anymore because it took time. Whoever built this took pride in it. Miriam had gone quiet. I turned to look at her. She was standing in the middle of the main hall, with her coat still on, looking up at the beams. "My grandmother used to hide in the storage room off the kitchen when my grandfather had business guests," she said. She said it was the only room in the building where she could hear the wind in the trees without anyone talking over it. I waited. "He was not easy to live with," she said. "My grandfather, not kind, not in private, but he built something worth keeping, which is more than a lot of men manage." She looked at the fireplace. "Russell doesn't see a lodge. He sees a number on a spreadsheet. He will tear this down and put up something that looks like a hotel, from anywhere in the world and nowhere in particular." I looked at the floor, at the wide fir planks, worn smooth by 70 years of boots and chairs and family dinners. "Old wood doesn't lie. It holds or it doesn't." "I'll sign Monday," I said. The legal review happened Saturday morning at a paralegal office. On 2nd Avenue East, a woman named Ms. Okafor, who went through the contract page by page and looked at me over her reading glasses when she got to the liability clauses. "You understand this protects you specifically from any board dispute or legal challenge related to the Ashford estate." "That's what it says." "It does." She went back to reading. "It's unusually thorough for a construction agreement. Ashford's thorough." She glanced up. "Do you know what you're stepping into?" I looked at the window. The main street of Owen Sound was Saturday morning quiet. A Tim Hortons cup, rolling across the sidewalk in the wind. More or less. More or less isn't the same as yes. "No," I said. "But I've looked at the building. The work is real. The paperwork is clean. And somebody should fix that porch before another winter takes the posts." Ms. Okafor put her pen down and looked at me for a moment. Then she initialed the last page. "You'd better be as good as she says you are." I signed on Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, I had 2 guys from town, a dumpster in the lodge driveway, and a load of materials scheduled from the mill in Meaford. My foreman, a third-generation carpenter named Gord, who had worked with my uncle and held opinions about everything, took one look at the east porch and exhaled like I had handed him a personal insult. "Whoever put this decking down didn't believe in blocking," he said. "I know. This is a rebuild." "I know, Gord." He crouched and looked under the joist line. "Okay, it's not as bad under here as I thought." He stood up. "Still bad though, that's why we're here." He looked at the lodge then at me. "This Ashford situation, is it going to cause problems for the crew?" I told him the truth. The same truth I had asked Miriam to give me. Gord nodded slowly while I laid it out. He was quiet for a moment after. Her cousin doing this for money? Her uncle. And yes, while his brother wasn't in the ground yet. Before. Actually. Gord picked up his nail bar. "All right," he said. "Let's fix the porch." That was all. No paperwork, no family name, no performance. Just a man with a nail bar and enough information to make up his mind. The trustee review on Tuesday was quieter than I expected. Miriam arrived with her solicitor, a binder of documentation, and photographs I had taken of the active worksite that morning. Materials staged, crew on site, a signed and notarized contract dated Monday. Russell arrived with his own lawyer and the expression of someone who had spent months building a sandcastle and just noticed the tide. The trustee board reviewed everything. Russell's lawyer argued that the contract was rushed, possibly improper, a transparent attempt to manufacture activity. Miriam's solicitor pointed out that a signed contract is a signed contract, that active restoration work is by definition not abandonment, and that if Russell wished to challenge the legality of a heritage restoration agreement, he was welcome to explain that position to a judge. The board chair, a retired judge named Hartwell, read the contract twice. Then he set it down and looked at Russell. "The property is operational," Hartwell said. "The filing is rejected." Russell looked at Miriam the way people look when they have spent a long time expecting to win something. "You built this overnight." "I built this carefully," Miriam said. "You had 8 months. I had a weekend. I think that says something about both of us." Russell stood, adjusted his jacket, and looked at me the way you look at an inconvenience you plan to address later. "I don't know what she promised you," he said. "A fair contract," I said. "That's all. You should try it sometime." Hartwell lowered his eyes to the table fast. I was fairly sure he was hiding something. Russell left without another word. For about an hour afterward, I thought the hard part was over. Then Miriam's phone rang. And then her solicitor's phone rang. And then her solicitor came over and said something in a low voice that made her go still. "What?" I asked. She turned her phone toward me. A headline on a local news aggregator, some regional gossip outlet I had never heard of. "Ashford hires last-minute contract hire, called suspicious by family source." The source was not named. It did not need to be. By evening, someone had called the mill in Meaford asking about my material order. Someone had called the county heritage office, asking whether my certifications were current. Gord called me at 7:30 to tell me a man he didn't recognize had been taking photographs of the lodge from the road. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the contract copy in front of me. The paper had gotten us through the trustee review. Paper was not going to hold off whatever Russell was building next. I called Miriam. She picked up on the second ring. "He's not done," I said. "No, he'll go after the crew next. Noise complaints, heritage violation claims, something to slow the site." "Yes." Her voice was steady in the particular way of someone who has already cried somewhere private and is not going to do it again. "The lodge needs to stay active every day, or he can claim an interruption," I said. "I know. You can't manage that from town if he's filing complaints every morning." Silence on the line. Then, "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting the most visible way to make clear this project is real and ongoing is, if you're at the site. You want me to stay at the lodge. The caretaker's cottage is on the north end of the property. It's intact. I checked the plumbing last week." She was quiet for a moment. "Jack." It was the first time she had used my name. I noticed it. "It makes sense operationally," I said. "That's all." "It makes sense operationally," she repeated, as if she was deciding whether to agree with that framing. "Yes." Another pause. "I'll bring what I need." She showed up the next morning, with 2 bags, a portable document scanner, and the careful expression of a woman who had prepared herself for something difficult and was not going to admit that the caretaker's cottage was actually charming. It was small. 1 main room, a narrow kitchen, a wood stove that I had cleaned out and tested the previous evening. The windows needed weather stripping, but they were original single-pane glass, and I had told her not to let anyone replace them. She stood in the main room and looked around. "It's smaller than I expected. Heritage buildings usually are." She caught something in my tone. I didn't mean it as a complaint. "The wood stove drafts well," I said. Don't let it get too low at night, or the cottage will be cold by morning. I'm not helpless. I didn't say you were. She set her bag down and looked at the window overlooking the escarpment. The view was extraordinary. Bare hardwoods on the slope, the bay in the distance, the light coming flat and clean off the water the way it does in October. My grandmother stayed in this cottage sometimes, she said. When my grandfather had guests she didn't like. I thought about a woman hiding from parties in a storage room, hiding in a cottage with this view. She had good taste, I said. Miriam almost smiled. She did. The next 3 weeks were not what anyone would write into a story, if they were trying to make it interesting. They were mornings in cold air, measuring and cutting and fitting. They were gored. Arguing with the mill rep about a wrong timber delivery. They were lodge permits and heritage office forms, and one afternoon, when the porch subfloor revealed a section of original log sill that nobody had known was there, and I spent 2 hours figuring out how to work around it without disturbing something irreplaceable. Miriam was at the site every day, not watching, exactly, working. She learned which forms needed same-day filing to keep Russell's complaints from gaining traction. She learned which board members needed a phone call versus an email. She learned when to call the heritage office directly and when to let the solicitor handle it. She also started making coffee for the crew. Not every day, but often enough. She remembered that Gord took his, with 2 sugars and no milk, which he confirmed by holding up the cup and looking at me, with an expression that said he was revising his opinion of her upward, and did not want me to make a thing of it. One evening I stayed late to work on a window restoration in the main hall, a sash replacement on the south wall, where the original counterweight ropes had finally given out. Miriam was at the long table near the fireplace working through files, the way she did most evenings. The wood stove was going. The hall smelled like pine shavings and old plaster dust and coffee that had been sitting too long. I was fitting the new rope through the sash channel when she said, without looking up, "You told Gord this building was worth saving before you told me." I glanced at her. I told him we were fixing the porch. You told him the truth about Russell and he said, "Let's fix the porch." That was you deciding. She set her pen down. You had already decided before you signed the contract. I worked the rope through the channel and tied the knot. The bones were good, I said. Buildings like this don't come back once they're gone. Most contractors would have said, that's not their problem. Most contractors are right. I tested the sash, let it slide. It moved the way a good window should. Smooth, balanced, no binding. My uncle brought me to a demolition once when I was 12. A farmhouse in Gray County. Solid fieldstone, interior woodwork, that somebody had spent months on. They knocked it down in an afternoon. I couldn't explain why it bothered me so much. I looked at the window. I think I've been explaining it ever since. Miriam was quiet for a moment. My father sold 2 other properties, she said slowly. In the 90s. Properties that were in worse condition than this one. He said it was practical. He was probably right. She looked at the fireplace. But I drove past one of those sites 2 years ago. Parking lot now. And I thought. He made a practical decision. And something that had been standing for 60 years was gone because of it. I came down from the ladder. Is that why the lodge matters to you more than the other holdings? She looked at her hands on the table. It's the one he couldn't bring himself to sell. Even at the end, when the maintenance costs were eating into everything. He just kept saying it needed the right person to take it on. She paused. I used to think he meant a developer with deep pockets. And now? She looked up at me. Now I think he meant someone who would be annoyed by the wrong plaster and spend 2 hours deciding whether to move a log sill. I sat down across from her. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind was coming off the escarpment the way it does at night. Steady and cold and not unkind. You know this gets harder before it gets easier, I said. Russell. He'll try something with the heritage permit. It's the cleanest angle he has left. I leaned back. And the press will keep running whatever he feeds them. Let them. She said it quietly but without hesitation. The building is getting fixed. The contract is clean. Every filing is current. He can talk to every reporter in Gray County, and it won't change what is actually happening here. I looked at her across the table. She was not the woman who had walked onto my dock 6 weeks ago. Or maybe she was exactly that woman. Only now I could see her more clearly. The careful posture was still there, but it was not armor anymore. It was just how she stood. You're not worried about the press, I said. I'm worried about a great many things, she said. The press is not one of them. Russell's heritage permit challenge came through the county office on a Thursday. By Friday morning, Miriam's solicitor had filed a response with supporting documentation. By Friday afternoon, the county heritage officer had visited the site, walked the property with me for 40 minutes, and left with a look on his face that suggested he had seen enough. The challenge was rejected the following week. Russell did not attend the board meeting after that. His proxy voted against Miriam on the lodge operating budget. He lost the vote 6-2. The Ashford Lodge stayed off every sale list. On a Saturday in late November, Gord and I finished the porch. New decking, new joists, original post spacing. The corner detail rebuilt to match the original from a photograph Miriam had found in her grandmother's albums. The boards were Douglas fir, kiln-dried, the same species as the floor inside. In 20 years they would weather to silver and look like they had always been there. Miriam came out. When we were cleaning up the site, she walked the porch slowly, heel to toe, testing the boards. She stopped at the east corner and put her hand on the post and looked out at the escarpment. The sun was low, the bay was the color of pewter, and the trees on the slope were bare, and the light made the whole thing look like a photograph of itself. Gord came up beside me and said quietly, "She's not going to say anything for a while." "No," I said. "Good." He picked up his tool bag. "Some things you have to stand still for." He drove out and I started loading the last of my materials. I was tying down the tarp on my truck bed when Miriam came off the porch and stood at the edge of the drive. "It's right," she said. "The corner detail? All of it." She folded her arms against the cold. "You said careless restoration is just tearing something down with extra steps." I had said something like that. I did not remember she had heard it. "This wasn't careless," she said. I looked at the porch. Solid, level, proportioned. The kind of work you do not notice because it looks like it was always that way. That is the only finish worth having. "No," I said. "It wasn't." Yes. We stood there for a moment, the two of us, in the cold late light, with the escarpment behind the lodge and the bay in the distance. And something shifted between us, the way things do when you have been working in the same space long enough to stop performing. She turned and looked at me, and I looked back, and there was no contract between us in that moment. No trustee board, no Russell. Just the porch we had fixed and the building still standing behind it. "Jack," she said. I did not get to answer before she stepped close and kissed me. Not for the heritage office, not for any board. For the first time since she had appeared on my dock, in that charcoal coat, something between us was ours alone. Neither one of us made a speech about it afterward. She pulled back and looked at me like she had surprised herself, and I said, "The stove in the cottage will be cold if we stay out here much longer." She laughed. Quiet, real, off guard, and her hand stayed on my jacket for one more second before she let go. We did not rush anything. I drove home. She stayed at the cottage. The next morning she made coffee and left a cup on the workbench where I could find it. And the morning after that, I made sure the stove was banked before I locked up the main hall so the cottage would be warm when she came in for the evening. Small things. That was how it started, and how it stayed, which turned out to be enough. Russell made 2 more moves over the winter, both of them smaller than the last. The board had seen enough. The heritage file was clean. The lodge had active contracts through spring, and the bookings for the following summer, the first in 3 years, were already coming in through Miriam's operations manager. By March, I was working on the interior of the main hall, floor restoration, lime plaster repair, the fireplace mantel rebuilt from a salvaged piece of white pine that Gord had found at an architectural reclaim yard in Barrie, and driven 3 hours to bring back because the profile was right. He pretended this was not sentimental. I let him pretend. One evening I came in from the site and found Miriam at the main hall table with no files. No laptop, no phone open, just one envelope in front of her, and the particular stillness of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting to see if they will follow through. I knew before she said anything. "What's that?" I asked, though I knew. She pushed it toward the empty chair. "Release of contract. Final payment, full terms satisfied. Everything you're owed, plus a retention bonus for scope overrun." She folded her hands. "I had my solicitor review it and I had an independent look as well. Everything's clean. Your business, your certifications, your reputation. Nothing touched." I sat down. "You rehearsed that a few times." "Yes." "How many?" "More than I'm going to admit." I looked at the envelope. "The work isn't finished. The original scope is. The porch, the roof, the structural items. What's left is interior refinishing, and you could subcontract that. You don't need to be the one on site anymore." "No," I said. "That's true." She kept going before I could say more. "You had a good business before this, quiet work, steady clients, no family entanglement, no press." She looked at the table. "I don't want you staying. Because you started this, and you feel like you have to see it through. I don't want obligation dressed up as something it isn't." That hit somewhere specific. I looked at the envelope for a moment. "You think that's what this is?" I said. "Obligation. I think you're someone who finishes what he starts." She met my eyes. "And I think that can look like choosing from the inside, when it's actually just being the kind of man you are." I opened the envelope. 1 page, clean terms, my name, her name, a signature line and a date. I set it back down. "Do you remember what you said about your grandfather's properties? The ones he sold?" She waited. "You drove past 2 years ago and there was a parking lot, and you thought he made a practical decision and something real was gone because of it." She was very still. "I'm not going to drive past this and wonder," I said. I slid the envelope back across the table. "Not the lodge and not this." Her eyes went bright at the edges. "Jack, you walked onto my dock and asked for the truth. I asked you for the same thing on day 1. So here it is." I leaned forward. "I don't want the contract released. I don't want the cottage empty. I don't want to stop finding your coffee on my workbench. I don't want to finish the floor in that main hall and have someone else be the one who sees it when the light comes through those south windows and in the morning and hits it right." She let out a breath that was not quite steady. "I was trying to be fair to you, I know." I looked at her across the table. "It was a kind thing to do, and I'm telling you it's not necessary." She looked at the envelope, then pushed it to the side of the table like it had said something rude. "I don't want to let it go either," she said. "Any of it." That was the moment the arrangement ended and something else began. Not in a solicitor's office. Not in a trustee review. At a table, in an old lodge on the Georgian Bay escarpment, with plaster dust on the floor, and a fire going, and the kind of quiet you only get in a building that has been standing long enough to know what it's holding. Life after that did not become easy. It became real, which is better. The lodge opened for guests in June. 12 rooms, the main hall for events, the porch finally fit for the summer mornings it had been built for. Gord came back to finish the window restoration in the upper floors, and managed to make it look like he had not been hoping for an excuse to return. Miriam ran Ashford Escarpment. Properties the way you run something you intend to keep. She fought the right battles and let the small ones go and learned. slowly, and, not without frustration. When to call the heritage office herself, and when to send me instead. Because apparently my particular way of being annoyed by wrong materials was more persuasive than she expected. Russell accepted a buyout of his minority position in the autumn. He moved to Calgary. We did not hear much after that. I kept my shop near the harbor. My marine work and my heritage work ran side by side, the same way they always had. Gord called it a personality disorder. I called it range. The following spring, Miriam and I had a small dinner at the lodge, for the people who had been part of it. Gord, Miss Okafor, the paralegal who had looked at me over her reading glasses, and asked if I knew what I was stepping into. Danny from the dock, who had been pretending to organize tackle on the day it all started. The heritage officer who had walked the property in November and left with a look on his face. It was not a ceremony. Nobody called it anything. We ate at the long table in the main hall, with the windows open and the spring air coming in off the escarpment, and the fir floors were finished, and the fireplace was clean, and the plaster was done right. After dinner, Miriam and I stood on the east porch in the dark. The bay was invisible, but you could hear it. She leaned into my side, and I put my arm around her shoulders, and we stood there listening to the water and the trees, and the old building, settling the way old buildings do at night. When no one is asking them to prove anything, when people asked later how it had started, she always said, he was the only contractor who asked to see the building before he agreed to save it, and I would tell them the rest.